On April 19th, the Times carried this story, slightly different. The defendants, 4 youths and a man, were involved in a free-for-all on Friday afternoon after they allegedly overturned a fruit stand at 368 Lenox Avenue, near 128th Street. The truth was that there were 3 boys and 2 men. The men, Facundo Acion, a Puerto Rican seaman, 47 years old, and Frank Stafford, a salesman, had no conceivable reason for overturning a fruit stand and pelting the proprietor with fruit, as they were charged with doing. The 3 boys, Wallace Baker, 19, Daniel Ham, 18, and Frederick Fraser, 16, were definitely cleared by the proprietor, who told the police they were not at his store.
The story reported in the New York Times of May 6, 1964, attributing to a researcher of Harlem Youth Opportunities Unlimited information indicating the existence of a Harlem gang or gangs indoctrinated and trained by dissident black Muslims and dedicated to organized anti-white activity has no basis in fact.
I saw the cops running behind a couple of kids. They snatched at one of the kids and reached and grabbed at the other. So the kids were trying to find out what was going on. So the cops asked why they went and bothered this man's fruit stand. So the kid said, "Listen, I don't know nothing about it." And they started shaking the kid around, smashing him around. The kid said, "Wait a minute, listen, don't shake me like this. I don't know nothing about it." So the kid got mad and dropped his books. Then the kid tried to get away from the cop. So the 3 cops teamed up on this one kid and just beat him down till he couldn't take it anymore. All he could do was just lay there. He couldn't throw another lick. So then the cops, they messed up his eyes. They was all bloody, his nose, his mouth, his head. This was a kid, couldn't be no older than 17. I saw the kid myself trying to fight this cop with his fist, trying to get away because he said he didn't do nothing. So the 3 cops jumped on him and they beat him down with this stick. He couldn't move.
We got halfway up the block and we heard a police siren and we didn't pay much attention to it. Then we heard these children scream. So we went back down the block to see what happened, and we seen this policeman with his gun out. And he had his billy in his hand, he was shaking it. So I put myself in front of the kids, because I thought he might shoot him, because he was shaking like a leaf and jumping all over the place.
The cops ran after those little kids that didn't have anything to do with it. And one of the rollers caught on to the little boy, and he put him between his legs, and he was going to beat the little boy on his head.
So I stood up and I said, "Why y'all beating on him like that, huh? You going to take him to jail? You know, there's no reason why y'all should beat up on him like that." Then one cop, he jumped up and started swinging on me, you know. Then he took out his gun and said, "Get up over there." I said, "For what?" And then another cop hit me on the head from behind, you know. hit me right upside my eye, man. And there was nothing I could do then but just fall on the ground and try to cover up to protect myself. They snatched me up and practically dragged me to the detective car, you know what I mean? And there was another young kid in there, too.
A patrolman, he grabbed me by my neck, and he flipped me over. Then he put his knee on my chest, and I couldn't move or anything. Then he asked me for my hand, and I couldn't give it to him because of the position he had me in. Then he handcuffed me. Then I gave him my other hand. Then he threw me in a police car. Then he took my friend Wallace, who was with me.
Then they put me in the car, handcuffed me to Daniel Ham. In the car, they were beating a brother for having his hand on the door, hitting him in the hand with a blackjack.
We went to the precinct, and that's where they beat us, for nothing. They took shifts on us, 6 and 12 at a time. They just beat me till I couldn't barely walk and my back was hurting. And all this time, they never took the handcuffs off.
I didn't know anything about it. They didn't even call me. When I saw Danny, he couldn't pull up his pants because he had a blood clot on each of his legs. And they didn't even bother to call me. I went down to the precinct, to see if I could see him. And they told me that they couldn't let me in. And they told me that he was going to be in court later on that night, 9 o'clock. And they made everybody, wait out in front of the precinct. See, when I was there was a whole line of policemen just stopping people from going in. And Danny told me that they beat him all night, and then they called in some more ones to beat him. And his hands, looked like they had pins stuck in them.
I had this big bruise on my leg from them beating me. I had to open up the bruise, let some of the blood come out and show them I was bleeding. I felt that if I hadn't showed them this, I wouldn't have went to the hospital at all. They got so tired of beating us, they just start spitting on us. Made us crawl all over the floor like animals, crap like that. How you doing, man? People coming in.
They call us cop fighters, you know what I mean? Every cop that came in start hollering, "Oh, you all are the cop fighters, huh?" And start punching me in the chest and the nose and the jaw, all over. When they first started punching on us, they would rest up for a while, Then they would rest up, and they went out and came back and started punching us all over again.
And then they had the nerve to call me to come to the hospital to sign for Wally because they thought they'd done broke his neck. So I rushed in and I asked the colored cop there, could I see him? He said, yeah, go on in. The white one told me to get out. I couldn't see him.
I can't describe any of them really, because the only way you can describe a policeman is by his badge. And before they came in, they took off their jackets, and came in they sweaters, acting like they were going to a gymnasium or something like that, to a sparring match or something, They came in with a bag of oranges, and started throwing them in our faces, saying, "You like fruit, huh? You like fruit? Well, take this and take that, Now, they did that, and here all 5 of us standing with our hand cuffed behind our backs. That went on until about 4:30 maybe.
When they got home, Wallace told me they beating on us all night. Every shift go off, one come on. Oh, God, how they stepped on the hands, handcuffs behind the back. I'm telling you, people wouldn't believe it. But I could just look at him and tell practically all what happened to him. He still got the blood clots on his legs, and they never did tell me the charges on him.
When Danny got home, he didn't even cry. He just tried to pull up his pants, to show me the bruises, and the clots. But he could only get his pants about that high, because the legs were swollen so bad. And he had a Red Cross plaster on his back, and his back was all bruised, his legs. And there was no one I could think to go to. know, I saw the blood and, those blood clots, and I saw the bruises, and well, I just couldn't believe that, you know, police would do something like that to somebody, you know. I just couldn't accept it.
I can believe it. There is the law, and the law is always right. You can stand up, and they can shoot you down, because they's in the right and you's in the wrong. They don't have to have no reason.
And so the long, hot summer began. The summer of promise. The summer of final liberation. But the jailhouse beating went on just the same. Just the same as last summer. And the summer before. 10, 20, 30 summers before. Nothing seemed to be changing. Except perhaps it was worse. Now they were beating openly in the street. In the full glare of day. Without pity. Without shame under the sun. Let the talk accumulate on tapes. It has the ring of truth.
But the pain I'd suffered, I couldn't suffer no more. I mean, I was already hurt. So when they started beating up on me the second time, I just told the policeman, I said, y'all might as well go on and kill me. So after about 3 hours or 4, they put us in a patrol car. So they took me on down to Bellevue, you know. And the doctor down there said that you must be in good shape to take the whipping that you took and not be in no pain down here. So they started giving me needles and stuff like that so they could knock me out and then try and give me an operation to save the eye. So they laid me down there for 14 long days after the operation trying to save the eye. So on the 14th day, the doctor came in, he said, we can't wait any longer because the other eye might become infected. So on May the 2nd, that's when they gave me the second operation to remove the eye.
There was this old man that was in the crowd. Now, when he saw them beating Frank, he tapped the cop on the shoulder and asked him what was he doing. And they turned around and whipped that old man down into the ground. And it's been 2 days and we haven't seen or heard from the old man. He's still in jail. And nobody knows nothing about him. Nothing. And they don't have nothing on him.
They don't want us here. They don't want us here, period. All they want us to do is work on these penny ante jobs for them. And that's it. They just beat our heads in whenever they feel like it. They don't want us on the street.
Because the World's Fair is coming, and they figure that all black people are hoodlums anyway, or bums. So they put them off the streets, so their friends from Europe, Paris, or Vietnam, wherever they come from, can come and see this supposed to be great city.
Then we heard children.
So here it is, testimony of open resistance, openly arrived at. The walls of the Friendship Baptist Community Center do not come tumbling down. Within them, rather, an aura of heroism begins to surround the young resistance. The social worker conducting the interview says, effusively, that although there were only a few fellows actually involved, they represented every young man in America. Minds were made up that night to do something about it. The people were proud of the way they saw the boys defending themselves from the police that Friday afternoon. They were going to the courts and charged the police department of the city of New York with police brutality.
Could have been me.
We want the whole world to hear these tapes.
The visitors from abroad who rode through the streets of Harlem would be affronted and made cynical by its poverty, while on their way to the great celebration, the crowning monument, the benchmark and the showcase of our business civilization, the World's Fair of 1964. They would have to see there was no escaping it. The rotting houses, the uncollected filth, the scenes of turbulence rising from a frustrated humanity, unable to escape from constriction and squalor. And when visitors would ask for an explanation of this sickness, in the very shadows of the strong towers of steel, glass, and light, lifting their arrogant apostrophes of power, they would have to be told that this was a long, long sickness. It was a plague that brought to people, because they were black, a life in which 50% of them lived in houses which could be officially condemned as unfit for human habitation, in which mothers and fathers stayed up all night to keep the rats from eating their babies, which operated on the minds of the children with such stultification and hopelessness that they found no healthy, no aspiring incentive for the use of their minds, in which 6 times as many people are murdered than anywhere else in this great city, and twice as many babies die at birth. And for a palliative, the greatest traffic, the most successful business in narcotics in the world is carried on.
Willie he'd have a special drawer in his dresser where he kept pigeon food. You know, sometimes you go in his room and you hear this, cheep, 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 cheep. And there'd be a sick pigeon under the bed. One time, they went so far, you know, as to get a burglar alarm for their babies because the kids were stealing them. And so they had to get the money and go buy them back. And that's what happened when we give them their allowance. You know, one time they said, oh, God, man, hey, Mom, I'm so hungry, you know. And I said, what you do with your lunch money? They said, well, and then they tell me, well, we had to go buy some more pigeons. Well, one day, you know, the kids was up there on the roof with the pigeons, and 2 carloads of detectives came, and don't you know they pulled their guns on those kids and searched them and told them they were going to take them down to the precinct. But one of the kids said to me, well, if you go with us, and we'll go to the police station. So I said, no, you just wait right here, and let me go down, let me find out what's happening, what's wrong here. I think they just didn't expect those kids to just speak out for themselves like that, stand up and say that they didn't do nothing, they wasn't going down to no precinct. I know my nephew told me, he said, he told one of the cops, he said, why don't you let Danny talk, why don't you let him explain? And so they talked, the kids did, and they told the police that they hadn't done anything, and they wasn't going to get in any police car, and they wasn't going to the police station, and they didn't go either.
I mean, the police here in Harlem think that the rooftops are guerrilla outposts, and they keep them under constant surveillance. I mean, any activity going on up there, they might shoot on sight and be prepared to move in and mop up any evidence of any organized movement being carried on up there, regardless of how innocent.
You know, the police would rather have them kids, you know, down on the street than up there on the roof, you know, where they're out of trouble, out of danger. They ain't doing anything up on that roof, just they're having fun, just taking care of those pigeons, staying out of trouble.
Less than 10 days later, Danny Ham's mother learned that her boy, with the wounds still aching and bleeding on his legs, was in the jailhouse again, or better known as the meat grinder. He had left his house about 7:15 in the evening, on his way to meet the lawyer who was representing him in the fruit stand case.
And after a while, you hear this knock on the door, bang, 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 bang. So I said, yes, who is it? He said, the detective. I opened the door after he said, a detective. And he said, are you Danny's mother? And I said, yes. He said, well, I am taking him down for questioning. I said, you taking him down for questioning? What for? And he didn't say nothing. He just turned around, went on down the steps, started on down the steps. So I called up and I said, well, what precinct you taking him to? And he still didn't answer me. He just kept on walking down the steps.
So Wallace said, he was coming in the house at the time. He seen the policeman coming in the house. I asked him why he didn't come in. He said because of the way they done beat him, night of April 17th. Said he didn't know what they wanted to do to him. But he knowed he hadn't did nothing.
My son Willie was arrested on April the 29th. My friend's daughter was at the house, and she didn't have cab fare to get home, and Lord knows I didn't have nothing to give her. So I asked Willie, would he walk her home? So then he left. I mean, they both left and went on down to 143rd Street. Well, sir, must have been about a half an hour later, I heard this sound coming off the roof. And then I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Well, I went to the door and I peeped. And then I saw these men coming up the stairs. And then one of them walked right onto the door and he says, does Billy Craig live here? Billy Craig? I said, no, there's a Willie Craig live here. And they said, well, that's who we're looking for.
Yeah, he was in bed when they came for him. So was my mother in bed because she said she had to get up when they knocked on the door. So she let them in, and because they asked if a Robert Rice lived there. And she went to him, and he was in bed, and he said, yeah, let him in. And when they came in, they asked him if he had been at the center. And he said, yeah, I was at the center, because that's where they play basketball. And, but you all were there also.
Ronald's arrest was from the home. Now, when they came for him, I asked them, well, what did he do? And they said, well, he didn't do anything, that they just wanted him for an investigation. Then one of them policemen tried to get right nasty.
I'll never forget his face, nasty as it was that night in my house. He didn't ring the bell. He just, took his stick and just knocked on the door. So I said, come in, and Lord, looked like it was about 30 of them. They was from the front of my house to the back, and I have 4 rooms straight through. So when they first entered, I have a rack down the hallway where you hang the coats on. So they went there and started taking down the coats, looking at the coats and throwing them on the floor. So I said, well, what y'all want? What y'all looking for? They didn't say nothing. Just kept on looking at the coats. So then they said, we gonna search your house. I said, well, you got a search warrant? And then this old nasty one, that old nasty one I seen in the papers, he said, no, I don't have no search warrant, and I'm gonna search anyway. So I asked them, I said, well, what are y'all looking for? They didn't say nothing. They just kept on flashing their lights. So I said, well, I have babies back there, 3 babies. My 3 grandbabies, they was in the back sleeping at the time. They didn't pay them babies no mind. They just picked up the mattress, dumping the babies falling all on top of each other. So you can understand I was a little angry at the time, but I kept on asking them. I said, well, what are y'all looking for? About 20 minutes later, they said, we're looking for Wallace Baker. I said, what you want with him? They said, we want him for assault. I said, who he assault? They never did tell me.
Well, it was about 11 o'clock, about 10 minutes to 11. And somebody knocked on my door. And my youngest daughter, she went to the door to ask who is it. And the detectives just pushed their way in.
And when they came in, it wasn't one, it was about 50. And all out front lined up with detective and police cars.
So I got up to see what was going on back there. And when I got back there was 10 or 11 detectives in the house. And one of them had thrown my son down on the chair and was trying to get the handcuffs on him. I said, why you wrestling him?
Shut up!
What you trying to do to him?
Shut up!
Then Ronald, I asked Ronald, I said, well, baby, I said, what did you do?
I didn't do anything.
Well, why are they picking you up then, I said.
I don't know.
He asked my son, where'd you get this jacket from? And My son told him my mama bought it for me. So then he came and he asked me. And I told him where I got the jacket from. I said I was throwing it away because it was all tore and ripped, you know, down near the pockets. And I said I had repaired it and I had tried to fix it, but it was just no good. And that I was throwing it out. Well, by that time, they had gotten the handcuffs on him, and they said they was gonna take him down. So I went on and I got dressed. And they had taken him on downstairs.
And about 45 minutes later, one of them came back and he said, "We got him." Well, I was on my way up to the front part of the house, and I turned around. And I came back and I said, "You got who? You got Willie?" And he said, "Yes, we got him."
So my mother said, well, if he has to go down to the precinct, she was going with him. And they said, you don't have to go. So she said, well, if he goes, I'm going. So she said, well, you'll leave, please, while I get dressed. And the detective said, we ain't going nowhere. They were going to stay there and watch her get dressed. So she said, well, you're going to get out of here. Well, they said, well, they had to search the place. So she said, you all ain't got no search warrant, you know, so you all can't be searching here. So then they left, and she got dressed. And then she said that when they went outside, there was 3 carloads of detectives. 3.
And when we get downstairs, they said that the children must go in one car and me in another. So I asked him, I said, well, where are the children going? So he said, well, they going in this car. I said, well, if they go here, I go. So the detective, he said no. I said, man, don't tell me that. I said, don't tell me that. Because if they die, we all 3 die together tonight.
They had had him for 5 hours, and they told me he wasn't there. 5 hours. I know because a neighbor told me that they had seen him being picked up.
I told Teddy, I said, Teddy, you go to the one on 123rd Street. So while he did that, I got dressed as quick as I could, and I went down to the precinct on 135th Street, because I thought that's where they were going to take him. But they told me that he wasn't there.
So I had to go over to 7th Avenue and get a taxi on up to the precinct. But while they was in the car, my son told me, they said, now you just act smart. We got you. Now you just act smart.
Oh, about 20 minutes later, Teddy came home and he said, well, they didn't have him at the 123rd Street precinct. And I told him they didn't have him at the 135th Street precinct. And he told me that they told him that if he didn't get away from there, they was going to arrest him too.
The policeman who had arrested him, he wouldn't say anything to me. He told some other detective to come and tell me what had happened. And this detective, he said if someone had assaulted you, wouldn't you want to find out what happened?
But they said they wouldn't tell me assault on who, what, where, or anything else.
So, well, so I said to Teddy, I said, come on, let's you and me go out here to the courthouse, and maybe we can find out what happened if we go there. So that's what we decided to do, because see, they didn't call me for the fruit ride. They didn't call me for that. So, and I said to myself, they're gonna probably not gonna call me again for this thing.
I kept asking if I could see him, and they wouldn't let me see him. They wouldn't let my husband or I go upstairs to the detective department to find out anything. They just would not let me see him for 5 hours. No one came down to us until about 1 o'clock.
When I looked at the boy, I mean, I couldn't tell he had been beaten, you know. All I could tell was he was real nervous because he was just tripping all over. I remember that. And so I asked the judge, I said, I'd like to speak to the boy in the court, you know. but the judge refused permission for any of us to talk to the boys. And, you know, I didn't find out what happened until I went to 275 at Atlantic Avenue, Brooklyn, you know, when I went to that jail.
I stayed there until about 6 o'clock. And then one of the colored detectives came up to me and he said, Miss Thomas, why don't you go home and get some rest? So you can be fresh in the morning when you come to court.
Things begin to emerge. Coats. Old coats. They are looking for old coats. There has been a murder that day in a second-hand clothing store. The account of it in the New York Times, May 1st. Quote, a group of boys entered the store just before 5 p.m. They took up positions around the shop and began taunting the proprietors. When one of the youths asked to see a suit, Mrs. Sugar replied they had none in his size. Another youth then drew a knife and stabbed the woman once in the heart, unquote. Daniel Ham, 18. Robert Rice, 17. Willie Craig, 17. Walter Thomas, 18. Wallace Baker, 19. And Ronald Felder, 18. All arrested and later indicted and arraigned for a murder which the police say was committed by one stroke of one knife in a human heart by one bloody hand.
And when we get down to the precinct, I kept saying, I wonder what it is. I wonder what it is. They don't give me no reason whatsoever for why they pick them up. Then one of the detectives, he asked me, he says, well, what do you think happened? He said a man was stabbed serious and a woman was killed. I said, well, what time was that? So he said it had to be before 5 o'clock. I said, well, what do you mean? I said, that boy was nowhere around there. I know where he was. He was at home. I talked to him on the phone. And about 1 o'clock, my little boy, James, was in the precinct room sleeping. Then they tell all of the parents for us to go into another room. So then when we go into the other room, they wake James up, and then they take him in for questioning.
It is very curious, and somehow very sad, that with but one exception, during the torture of these mothers, nowhere does the face of the enemy appear. How frightening to have an enemy so powerful, he is faceless, like Yahweh, so inhuman that when he takes off his coat and his badge, he becomes invisible, or the mere embodiment of inflicting pain.
He was supposed to be looking for a dagger. Well, in looking for a dagger, he broke my chair, he broke my couch, he broke the arm off my couch, and he just tore up my mattress. Turning it over, he had to rip it up to look for his dagger, and he was very nasty to my mother. Very nasty to my mother. And then he wanted to tear down some boards that had been up there for 20 years, looking through Robert's clothes. And he said, well, where did Robert get all these clothes? And my mother just told him that my husband and I worked. Well, you know, he took down all those clothes and he just stepped on them looking for his evidence.
Why did they need evidence?
The press, radio, and television had been building up a kind of horrified lynch mob in the rest of the city against Harlem. In Harlem itself, a glacier-like detachment took place between the mothers and their neighbors.
I went to the local Democratic Club, and I gave them money, or I had given them money. You know that they didn't want anything to do with it?
Everybody turned their back on us and gave us the runaround.
Yes, I went to the NAACP, and they told me they wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Riding the subways to visit their boys in the Brooklyn prison, the mothers saw in every newspaper the hard, bloody rain of invective and accusation falling on the heads of their sons. and the police still kept their heavy hand on them, applying the same pressures of repression, pursuit, and duplicity to the younger children.
We was sitting on a stoop one day, and little James told me, he said, Mama, the police came and got me, and they took me someplace downtown. They just came to his school and took him out of his classroom and took him downtown. Kept him downtown from 12 to 4. Then they asked him, they said, well, what do you know about the murder? So little James, he was just so scared because they had him in that big room. And they asked him, well, what do you know about the murder? And he said he didn't know anything. So they said, well, where was Ronald at the time? So James said that Ronald was at the fish market around the corner here. And then they said that they didn't want to hear that story. Said it wasn't Ronald in front of the store when the murder took place. Little James was so scared that they was gonna whip him that he said yes. Ronald was right here in this house when that other thing happened. My little boy was just scared. Scared that they was gonna be beating on him. That's why he said what he did.
The mothers of Harlem stand accused of carrying the seed of murders in their very womb. Now, whenever a child is born into that world, he has to carry on his back, along with every other social liability known to man, the stigma of being a potential killer. An instinctive killer of whites because they're whites. A killer because he's black.
The New York police force, after sending in secret hordes of plainclothesmen disguised as drug addicts, winos, street cleaners, salesmen, window cleaners, and taxi drivers, and sitting interminably at every corner in unmarked cars, were unable to turn up any evidence whatsoever of a blood brotherhood murder gang. Harlem had wall-to-wall cops. These, unlike the Blood Brothers, quite visibly exist. They are organized into a tactical police force of some 20,000 men, which seems to have no other purpose than to suppress, harass, and arrest black citizens.
It never takes long for the show of force to become the use of force. But why is it that the people of Harlem is always the victims? Huh?
The boys are never seen. They are entombed in Brooklyn.
I had to show the proper identification to prove that I was his mother before they'd even let me see him. And he was in a cage. And I had to talk to him through bars. He said that he didn't know what it was they had charged him for. He didn't know anything about that. And he asked me, could I please get him a lawyer? But you see, he knew that I didn't have money. I just don't have money. So I didn't know where to turn. I didn't know what to do.
Docket 1,295. On docket 1,295, the officer being duly sworn states that the defendants acting and together in concert with each other violated section 1897 of the penal law as a misdemeanor. In that at the above-mentioned time and place, the defendants were in police custody on an unrelated police charge.
In the case of all 6 boys, One lawyer, after the arraignment, had signed a notice of appearance for all of these boys. This meant he would be appointed by the court to defend all of them, and as counsel for indigent defendants, and be paid $2,500 per boy. This one lawyer, then, has the power to prevent all other lawyers from seeing the prisoners, even though the prisoners would like to see their own lawyers.
Well, I didn't think this was a good thing. And the reason I didn't think this was a good thing was because I had a friend, and she was in the same position. The lawyer just sat there, didn't get up one time and say something in defense of her boys. Just sat there. And I was in the court when it happened. And so by them appointing me legal aid, I thought the same thing was going to happen to me, and that's the reason I didn't want no legal aid.
When we finally went to court, the judge called me up to the bench, and then he called my husband up to the bench. And he said, I think you all would save money if you used a court-appointed lawyer, a public defender. You shouldn't use your life savings and what have you on this case. You know, we would help you out. And we said no. We really wanted our own lawyer, but he kept saying that you'd save $2,000 or $3,000, and we weren't the only ones that he said this to, because they had said this to Mrs. Craig, because she had her own lawyer too. They just didn't want us to have our own lawyers. They wanted us to have a public defender.
It was a legal aid lawyer trying to confuse the boys. Like he go to talk to my son Danny. He said, Danny, you might as well confess, because Mrs. Thomas's son said you did it. And then he go to Thomas and he said, Thomas, you might as well confess, because Baker said you did it. And then he go to Baker and he said, you might as well confess, Baker, because Rice said you did it. You know, and so on like that, you know. This was our defense attorney, the legal aid lawyer talking, mind you.
We didn't know where to go. We didn't know where to turn. It was only till we came around here to Mr. Lynn, and that was a week or so later, maybe 2 weeks, when Miss Thomas said, I got to find somebody to help these boys.
There is a pleasant fiction that the judge, out of compassion for a poor client, will appoint some leading light of the bar to defend him. Nobody really believes this. And in the case of the boys, one lawyer was appointed who fell dead in the courtroom because he was a chronic alcoholic, never seen sober in the courtroom during all his years of practice, and yet appointed by a benign justice to defend the life of an 18-year-old boy. My main argument, Your Honor, is that the practice of the courts in denying to a poor person the right of choice of counsel is that it makes a class discrimination based on money, based on property qualifications. When this distinction is made, it sets up a violation of the 14th Amendment, because it is a denial based upon class distinction of the equal protection of the law. We charge that to deny a poor defendant the right to choose his own counsel is to make a class distinction which makes it impossible for him to have a fair trial.
The presiding judge, sitting on the habeas corpus hearing, had been a district attorney for 27 years, had been a hunter against the hunted. He would wave aside citation after citation, saying, I know that, get on, hurry up, acting as though he were engaged in a contest, as if he were on the other end of a ping-pong table, obligated to return every shot, field every challenge, without a moment's hesitation or deliberation.
Your Honor, I've been to the prison to see my young client, Willie Craig. He tells me that it is the common practice to beat the prisoners while they're in the jail. They take them on the elevators and stop between the floors, and then they wake them over. This is a common practice in this jail system.
They owe us. They owe us a debt all the way back to slavery.
And then, another policeman, this time off duty, knocked another black boy to the ground. This time not with a club, but with bullets from his police pistol, pumping a shot into his body as he lay dying. This was on Thursday morning, July 16th, 1964.
The Department of Police enjoys little or no confidence on the part of the people of this community.
What is directly responsible for the outbreak last night and today?
Well, I understand the shooting of the youngster over in Yorkville by a police lieutenant was directly responsible, but that simply triggered a seething feeling of resistance and revolt that's been underneath the Negro skin for a long, long time.
Do you think there's an easy solution to this?
There is no easy solution to it. There is no easy solution.
The next day at noon, the Congress for Racial Equality organized a demonstration at the 67th Precinct House. Some 400 students marched there from the school that Powell attended to 67th Street, between Park and Lexington. There, they ran up against police barricades and patrolmen by swarms. The following evening, a street rally to protest the killing was held at 125th Street and 7th Avenue. After the meeting, many of the people began to congregate at the 28th Precinct on West 123rd Street to demand the arrest of Gilligan for murder. The police, after setting up barricades, began to charge the crowd with nightsticks and guns, beating and dragging off the demonstrators. Police began beating and shooting in a saturnalia of violence, which left the streets slippery with blood. The blood flowed so unrestrainedly, the blood of black people, unarmed, in the home streets, that at Harlem Hospital, sawdust was strewn on the floor because there was no time to mop it up. It was the fruit stand riot again. The tactical police force arrived on the scene, and Harlem was sealed off from outside traffic, and its streets from its own citizens.
What happened to the boys? After 8 years of fighting in the court, in trials and mistrials, finally in the year 1972, we were able to get 5 of them released.
Daniel Ham. Willie Craig. Walter Thomas. Wallace Baker. And Ronald Felder.
One of them is still in jail, Robert Rice, serving a life term because the confession was beaten out of him. We have his case now in the United States Supreme Court.